Thanks for tuning in to Stay Sharp with Razorleaf, your secret weapon for all things digital and manufacturing. In this episode, which is part 2 of 3 in the components of a PLM system, Jen and Jonathan delve into the less common or more specialized components of PLM, including platform capabilities, file management, process management, and product structure management. They explore topics such as scalability and performance, localization, simulation, and manufacturing data management, and more topics than that. They highlight the need for integration and customization to meet specific organizational requirements. Let's listen in for Primer Part 2 with Jen and Jonathan.
Welcome back to Stay Sharp today, everybody, the podcast about all things digital related to products and manufacturing. I am joined by my co-host, Jonathan Scott.
Hey, everybody.
Who is also going to double again as our guest. Last episode, we were talking about the components of PLM systems, and we got through a fair amount of them, but we're stretching this out across a couple episodes because there's just a lot to talk about. So today we're going to start by summarizing the last episode and then dig into some of the functional elements of PLM that are not the most common. Jonathan, you want to kind of start us off with where did we end up last time?
Yeah. So just, kind of catching up for everybody for context. Last time we were saying, okay, we're going to talk about PLM components. First off, what's PLM? Like we've done episodes on that, but we kind of went back and said, PLM is a systematic approach to how people make products, right? So it's the entire life cycle of a product lifecycle management. But PLM is the approach. PLM systems are the tools that help us manage that approach, right? So we dug into a little bit of that, and then I think then we started to get into those main categories, right?
Right. And now, if I recall, and I will admit to having written them down, so that because I don't recall them all off the top of my head, we did talk about platform capabilities. Just going through the list: platform capabilities, file management, both documents, CAD, etc., process management. Product related structure. We touched on collaboration as well, and those are the primary ones that we focused on, the main areas of last time. And we're going to dig in a little bit deeper with those today. Yep. But we're also in the next episode, just kind of seeding your interest for next time. We'll get into project management, systems engineering, and product architecture, some variant management or product line engineering, compliance, process planning and management, and then maybe touch on ALM a little bit.
Right.
Correct? That's our big list.
That's right. That's our big sort of broad areas of PLM list. And what we did last time is we said, all right, what's the most common, right? The most common areas of functionality you see that are part of that broad list, right? So it was really out of the first 5 that you just mentioned, those kind of main areas, we dug into some of the things that are in those that you see almost all the time, right? Any PLM system you look at that you would find. And those things were, just kind of recapping, on the platform side, ID and authentication. Are you kidding me? ID and authentication management, security, metadata tracking, data organization, search, administration, that kind of thing. Those were all like platform pieces that you see almost all the time. In file management, we talked about generic file management, document management, and then CAD management of different varieties, right? Mechanical CAD, electrical CAD, whatever. And then in process management, the thing you see almost universally is engineering change management, whether it's ECR, ECO, ECN, that kind of thing. And then in the product structure area, BOM management. Typically, engineering BOMs are the thing that just about every PLM does. And then on the collaboration aspect, file viewing. You almost always see some kind of file viewing, right? If it's a PLM that's more focused on electrical, it might be sort of focused toward those ECAD formats. If it's more mechanical, maybe more MCAD formats, or maybe it covers lots of different formats. But file viewing is one of the things you see that kind of in that collaboration category. And I think that's what we touched on last time, right? In terms of the most common things that you see, but oriented to that overall big picture of the 11 things you went through.
Right. And we're going to dig back into those top or those main 5 then today.
Yeah.
Just in greater depth, right?
Well, in greater depth and covering the things that are less common, right? That still fit within those categories. So, maybe the place to dig in there is platform. right? Because we talked about platform functionality and we named a bunch of things, but there are a
Right.
few that we left out
Okay.
that I think we want to circle back to. And let's just do that for each of these main 5 and sort of be comprehensive about it in this episode.
Okay. So let's start there then with platform capabilities. What did we miss last time? Or what?
Okay.
No, sorry, not what did we miss? What is less common or more specialized?
Right. Yeah. What did we leave out that we want to come back to? And I think so. We did identification, authentication management with users' logins. Right. We did security, differentiating like who can see what, who can do what, metadata tracking. What's the information about the stuff that you're tracking, files or whatnot.
Right.
But tracking things like part numbers, description, et cetera. Data organization. Can you put it in folders or workspaces or that kind of thing? Linking, tying things together, which is what helps us build up digital thread. Search, can you find things not through sifting through big buckets or going across links, but can you find things just by I'm looking for that information in that data field? And then administration. Do you have some tools to help you deal with all of this? So those are the things we touched on last time in this platform area.
Right. And if you missed any of those, refer back to the earlier episode.
Exactly. We do. Go back to episode 1. You can get all the details on that stuff. But the things that we didn't cover, that we left out, because you don't see them in every PLM system. All right. So one of those is scalability and performance. Now, this is a little bit odd because today, some PLMs that you see are cloud native PLMs, and they deal with some of these issues just by being on the cloud. But in a lot of areas, traditional PLMs that are not cloud native, they have special capabilities here to help you scale and help the system perform if you've got a larger team, a more distributed team, that kind of thing. So what am I talking about here? I'm talking about like distributed file vaults. Right? This was a big deal back in the day with early PLM. I think 20, 30 years ago when you had some people at a site in the US, some people at a site in Europe, and they each had CAD files and they needed to collaborate on them. And these CAD files were huge. Right. So, you needed a way to say, all right, I can manage CAD files here, I can manage CAD files there, and I can share them. And there are capabilities built into some of these platforms that help you do that. Syncing, distributing, those kinds of things. So that's an example of what I mean by scalability and performance. There are other things that come about in the architecture of how people write these systems, like from an IT side. Now, I won't get deep into that. We touched on a little bit of that in the infrastructure episode we did sometime recently. I forget when that was, but and we may come back to that one too. But all right, so platform capabilities, scalability and performance is one. Another one, touching on that global piece again for a minute, is localization. This is something that can be very important and people don't always think of. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is language localization. So can I, when I go into the tool, I'm sort of selfish. I always think of these tools in English because that's my native language. But
I was thinking the same thing. But yeah, that's not the case. Not everybody speaks English.
Exactly. And nor does everybody want to, as the first thing they think of to communicate. So can you change the interface of the system that we're talking about so that, all the labels and all the buttons and everything, are in the language that you're most comfortable with? So if you're working with a global team, everybody can work easily. When we think about things like user experience, everybody's like, oh yeah, these tools today should have a modern user experience. Well, this is a pretty basic one. Like, can you interface with me in the language that I use every day? So that's another platform capability that not every tool has an ability to control that and manage it. So that, when I log in, I get the language I want, that kind of thing.
Right.
And there's another piece here that I'm not talking about that some systems will help you deal with, which is the data itself, right? I'm just talking about the UI, what do the buttons and the commands say? But it's a little bit even trickier thing to say, well, I've got a field where I keep the English description, and I've got a field where I keep the Mandarin description, and a field where I keep this language, that's another thing. Anyway, but it's all sort of wrapped up in this. These are all platform capabilities that I think we didn't touch on last time because you don't see them all the time, but they are pretty important.
Okay. So that's a couple then within the platform capabilities. When we're getting down into file management, what are some extended areas there?
So file management, we talked last time about, all right, managing any kind of file, just keeping versions of it, keeping them straight, keeping them secure, We talked about document management, that, that's a sort of specific type of file that you care about, that a lot of people use. And we talked about CAD file management. So those are all the more common ones. Okay, so when we get away from those, what are the things we didn't touch on that some PLM systems will do or can do or even should do in some cases? You alluded to one, the last time we were talking about categories, when you mentioned simulation. That's a big one these days, right? So
literally,
can you manage simulation files? And, big one, because the files can be huge. That's one of the challenges of this, right? And the special thing that some PLM systems will do is they know how to deal with that. They know how to deal with these gigabytes and gigabytes and sometimes terabyte-sized files that relate to design simulation, performance simulation, that kind of thing. So that's one. Some people will call that simulation data management, simulation product data management, lots of different acronyms there. Another one, and you may get the sense that we're kind of thinking through or talking through some of the stages of a product's lifecycle. Another one is manufacturing data. So the specific types of files that you need to do manufacturing work, like CNC files, CMM files for inspection, right? CMM, coordinate measurement, machine measurement. Yeah. So I might have that one wrong, but the idea, like, all right, you're programming an inspection machine, just like you program a machine tool, or additive tools, right? These days, additive manufacturing files. What are the files that you need there? STL files or other specific formats. So managing those kinds of files, and I'll say that can blend into another functionality. It's a little separate. It's sort of taking a step further. Some PLMs will do DNC, distributed numerical control. I think that's where that one came from, acronym-wise. But it's about, how do I take the files I'm managing and get them out to the machine tools themselves, right? Because when we're talking about shop floor and machine tools, those aren't always, Windows-based computers, right? Some of them are legacy, much older, different communications formats. You don't just connect them to the Wi-Fi and send a file to them. You can't airdrop to a CNC machine.
So
that function,
G-code is what you're talking about, sending them G-code.
Sending them G-code, yes. Sending those machines G-code, sending them whatever you need to send them. All those file types we just talked about. CMM, the additive file type that you might need to 3D print something. But getting them to the machine is maybe a little different functionality than just managing them in the PLM. So there's a couple of capabilities there. And then I think another one I'd mention that comes up a fair amount, we touched on this as one of the broad categories. We said, well, there's some ALM-like stuff that PLM can do. Well, to that point, in this file management area, source code control, right? So if you're talking about managing the files related to software, sort of the raw material of software, so to speak, managing source code is its own functionality and capability. There's some things that you need to do there that are unique to that file type that some PLM systems do. So I think that's another one of the areas of file management that you don't see everywhere. Sometimes you might even say it's in ALM, not PLM, but some PLMs do it, and it's a more specific thing.
Right. Well, I think that's kind of where we are right now in the discussion, right? Some of these things, and maybe that's why they're considered like extended area functionalities within our discussions, is because they can also be handled somewhere outside of PLM.
Right.
But some of the PLM systems do actually provide functionality for this. It almost feels like we're going, our initial discussion was focused a lot on the engineering aspects of PLM, CAD data management, et cetera. And now we're going beyond that to manufacturing data, et cetera. So, as far as, different types of files, next thing I think we were talking about was process management. So we focused again on engineering change orders and that change process. What are some things beyond that that PLM can assist with?
That, I think, actually, the transition into this topic is a great way to think about this, because I'll say the first thing is you might see engineering change that even gets broadened out because of the additional stakeholders or people you might see involved in the process in a PLM system or in larger PLM systems or PLM systems that have a broader focus. So you might take engineering change and it turns into enterprise change, right? Now, even in some common smaller PLM systems, you might still see that. But yeah, so you could see that one process itself get broader, bring more people in. But in addition to that, things that you'll see in process management sometimes that aren't the most common are, I'll say, more like governance types of processes, things that take it up a level, like design reviews or stage gate processes. So still maybe engineering centric, and still a process, right? Still a standard repeatable process because it kind of falls in this area, but maybe with a different focus. Maybe some different types of files are being routed. Maybe different people are involved, that kind of thing. Another one might be shifting to a different part of the life cycle to the manufacturing area. Things like deviation processes or corrective and preventative action, CAPA processes. Warranty return processes. Oh, we're getting this in. What's wrong with it? We're going to look at it, see if that lead to some other processes like an engineering change. So all these things in operations that you might see, that's an area that some tools will tackle. And maybe they'll just tackle one or two of those, or they'll give you sort of generic process management that you can use to write your own. So that's another area. Another one that I see that I put under this process management umbrella is, I'll say, funneling processes is the best way I can think to describe them. So I mentioned deviation a minute ago, right? You got a manufacturing deviation, something's changed. I want engineering to tell me what's okay in this instance of that product to still ship or whatnot. That's a very specific process.
Right.
But leading to that is some sort of like defect identification. So on the shop floor, you might see 20, 30 defects a day that you need to disposition one way or another. And so it's sort of like a funnel. All these things that come in, they go through a little bit of a process. Oh, it's this kind of defect? Send it to that guy, see what he says. Oh, it's this kind of defect? Send it to this other person, see what they say. And then you get down to, you've closed a bunch of them, you get down to a couple that you're like, well, I need to turn that into a process. I need to turn it into an engineering change, or I need to turn it into a deviation. Okay. Right?
That makes sense.
Same thing as another funneling example I'll give, which is like issue management, right? Folks, a lot of times you want to have the whole enterprise, everybody in your company, you want to give them an opportunity to bring things up, to improve the product, ideas they might have, things they might see. Hey, I heard this competitor's doing this. So issue management is another one of those funneling things where people can bring up anything they want related to the product, maybe categorize it to this or that product inside your product line. And then there are people who do a short process like, oh, it's a warranty issue? We'll send it to that guy. Oh, it's a product marketing thing? Send it to that person. So it's another funneling activity. And I think that's a process management capability that some PLMs have, not all do. And a lot of times they will lead to these others. And that gets you some interesting like analytics and things later. Like, where are most of our engineering changes coming from? Oh, they're coming from manufacturing defects. Oh, they're coming from incomplete engineering definitions. So if you've got a funneling thing, you can see some of that of the bigger picture in the life cycle of the product. So that's another capability I think is related.
I'm curious because that's all of the things that you were talking about there in the funneling processes were basically around issues or deviations, et cetera. Do PLM systems handle at all ideation on the front end of things when you're just conceptual design, basically?
I think so, right? I mean, I think that's another place where you can have a process. It might be a little fuzzier, but you still, in an ideation funnel, you might want to bring things down. Lots of good ideas. These, aren't going to stick, but this one comes to the next level. And then maybe that leads into a new product development process, right? Or some other type of process that you manage. So yeah, I mean, I think ideation could be another funneling thing. Some PLMs would have specific functionality around ideation also, right? So I think it can be both. Maybe it's a funneling thing. Maybe it's its own functionality.
Okay. All right. Okay. So what else? What's next then?
Yeah. I think in process management, another thing that's a good one to touch on that I've seen a couple times, and I think this has got real value for some organizations, is an email integration is part of how they do process management. Because, PLM, I'm going to get philosophical for a minute, but PLM, it's good for a lot of the discussions and conversations about your products to stay in that PLM system so that when you build out that digital thread, everything is there in one place for you to access later. But the reality is that's not how everybody behaves. Email is ubiquitous. We all use email all day. So some PLM systems will bridge that gap by saying, look, I'm going to integrate my process management capabilities with email because that's where a lot of people do their processes today. So simple things like all right, the system can just send and receive emails and sort of tie it back to these processes you're running,
right.
to things where, oh, you can actually vote via email, right? So the system will send out an email about a process and say, hey, here's the summary of it, vote yes or no. So the person never has to actually go into the PLM system itself. They just reply to the email with their yes or no vote. And the email is kind of the proxy. It's a proxy interface for the PLM. So that's another functionality that I think is interesting.
That is interesting. And I want to dig into that a little bit more when we get into the collaboration aspects of that, because that seems like there's some pretty significant overlap into that particular area.
Yep.
But that's further on. Stay tuned.
But I got one more before we move out of process management.
I
got one more that's a biggie. So I'll say it fits under process management, but it's very different than the ones we've been talking about, where people are running a process and the system is queuing and triggering people to do their work. And that is, if you can manage a process and the system automates certain steps, like, all right, the engineer's done approving, so I'm going to move it on to the purchasing person. Well, the system's doing the move it on part. What if you took the people totally out of the loop? So there are some PLM tools and systems that have this capability for process automation that I put under this category of process management. And let me give you a couple examples. So one is like data packaging or data translation, data shaping. So maybe you combine this with the other human-centered pieces, or maybe it happens on their own. Say I release a design, okay, and I'm working in some business that's part of a supply chain, lots of different partners I work with. When I release the design, I would like to take all the CAD files for the whole bill of materials structure that was in that release, and I'd like to convert them all to a neutral file and to some format that I use to communicate with all my suppliers. Well, that's a heck of a process, right? So having that automated to go down through the steps, all the levels of the bill of material, open up each CAD file, convert it, save it, maybe even validate it, right? Because there are tools that can help you do that say, well, I want this step file compared against the native CAD file, make sure that it's right before I send it to somebody. That's an example of a capability here. Here's another one, right? So not just sort of data translation and packaging, but what about optimization processes? So this is going to tie to a topic that we touched on the other day in our other episode about simulation, right? So if you're managing simulation files, you can put a couple of things together here and say, well, what if I had a simulation that used a CAD file, and that CAD file could have some input parameters that let me change the CAD file, and I ran it through the simulation. If I got the result I wanted, then I knew how to change the parameter and change the CAD file again and rerun the simulation and get a new result. And if it was trending the right direction, I could keep doing that process until I got exactly the result I wanted. So that kind of optimization process, that's another one that can fit into this area. And only certain PLMs have that. And it's getting into that area of, SPLM, SLM, simulation lifecycle management, But that's another good one or important one, I think.
Yeah, I mean, all of the automation pieces, any of that seems very complex, very useful, very like time saving, but very complex. So I'd be surprised if do you have a feel for how like great a percentage of PLM systems have that kind of functionality versus do not?
I don't. I think this is a place where it gets interesting. Some of the big players have it. Some of the big players have it because they've acquired something and then incorporated it into their PLM platform. There are other players who specialize in this, and I would say that their PLM tool is actually mostly simulation focused, and then they're growing out from there, like CAD management, other things to kind of interface with it. So it's a kind of a, I don't want to say new. It's not new, but it's a maturing spot in the industry where there is no like, oh yeah, commonly this is what you see and when you see it. A lot of different approaches to it.
Yeah, very gray area, it sounds like.
Yep.
So is that the total of process management? Have we dug in?
I think so.
Did we miss anything?
I mean, it's enough anyway.
It's enough. I mean, we do have time limits, so you're right.
People listening to this episode are like, yeah, tell me about it. It is enough.
All right. So let's go on then. I think product structure was kind of the next piece.
This is a big one. Because, when we talked about the most common thing you see here, it's bill of material management. And it's usually, EBOM, engineering bill of material management. But there's a lot that people do in this area, or at least I'll put it in this area, in PLM systems that can be industry specific. That's quite interesting. So I'll jump in on one. Let's say you're still just kind of engineering focused, component management. So the components within those bills of material, you could just be tracking a record, and it's pretty straightforward, pretty simple, and you kind of put them together in a hierarchy and you call it an EBOM. But you could also be tracking a lot of metadata. And this is, I know, subjective, right? Maybe 10 fields of metadata is a lot for you, but I mean a lot, like 50, 100, 200 fields of metadata. Some people will call this PIM, or product information management, right? So I've got lots of metadata from all parts of the enterprise. I've got marketing names, I've got regulatory labels, I've got things that I need to track about just one component, but lots of information I need to track about it and then manage very carefully so that it ties back to process management. Like I got long approval processes for who has to approve or read that and this language or that language. So there's a lot you can do here that's just managing a single component and making sure you've got a central place to keep it all. So that's one that I think is interesting, and not every system does that well. Lots of them say they can, they got the facilities, but they don't all have the functionality around it. And there's one that I'll say is even a subset of that that's worth talking about here, and that is material compliance. So material compliance in several PLM systems that I've seen it really is focused on compliance, because the idea is people ran into regulations like REACH, RoHS, ELV, other things that come up in certain markets where, well, you can't have a product with too much of that substance and bring it into my market and sell it, right? I don't want that much lead in my products. I don't want that much cadmium in my products, that kind of thing. And so to figure that out, for organizations to think about that when they're doing product development, they have to keep track component by component of the different substances in their product. And where PLM's really helping them out is maybe they're global and they want to sell in a bunch of different markets. And so they've got different pieces of compliance they need to do in different places. REACH for here, RoHS for there, WE for that. There's all these different ones. You got to keep them all straight. But on your product, you'd like to just know, well, what are the materials in it so I know how compliant I am with this one, that one, the other one. So this functional area is about tracking all that stuff. It's kind of like component management, all these extra pieces of information, all the substances in your components. But it's also about functionality like running totals, doing math, because you might have things like maybe your compliance thing is about, made in America or made in this country. And you want to know the number of components that were made, manufactured, assembled, or whatever by country of origin. And you need to run a percentage so that you can say, I'm slapping that label on the product.
Right.
So I know I'm getting deep, but that's another important area.
When you're talking about material compliance, that's going to become more and more critical the closer and closer we get to additive manufacturing.
Yeah.
Being an actual process that we're relying on for component creation and things along those lines. It's still not 100% at scale, but it'll get there. And when it does, those materials are changing all of the time. The chemical makeup of those are changing.
They are. And that point about geography, or if that's another compliant thing, well, with additive, you could be making it anywhere. Well, maybe you need to think about that. So it's just another place where if you track the data, you can maybe make use of it in other ways. And some systems help you with this, and not all of them have that capability. So it's one to think about.
Right. So aside from that, if you're, this is all stuff that's primarily been under your control to this point, but not everybody is entirely vertical as far as their product creation.
Right. And staying on that component theme, when that's the case and you're buying components from somebody else, you may still have to do that material compliance thing we talked about. But for sure, what you need to keep track of is, well, what are you buying? Who do you buy it from? Do you have other options for it? Alternate substitutes when you can't get that one from those people. And how do you make sure that they are giving you the thing that you need? Right. And so I'll put all this under a broad category, maybe not broad. It's within that product structure management area, but under the title of manufacturer equivalent parts, or approved vendor lists, approved supplier lists, approve whatever lists.
Right.
But these kind of blend together that you want to track not just your component in a bill of material and that has your part number on it, but you want to track the part number or component that somebody provides you. And you want to link those together. And then you may want to track some metadata about that linkage so that okay, I could get that resistor from supplier A, B, or C, and they each have their own part numbers. But when I get it from A, it has these tolerances on it, so it fits my specification well. But if I get it from vendor B, sometimes they're a little looser. They may not quite fit it. So I have to get this special one from them. Or the price is this, or the whatever, right? But there's a lot of metadata to manage and some functionality around keeping track of those. And depending on your situation, maybe knowing who's your preferred supplier, that kind of thing. But that manufacturer equivalent capability,
right?
That's another important thing inside of this product structure management.
It's a good thing we have PLM systems around to manage all of this because the complexity is staggering at this point. And we're not even halfway through.
That's right. And it gets worse, right? So let's continuing on the
better.
product structure.
It gets better.
The complexity gets worse. It gets better that some PLM systems deal with this, right?
There you go.
That's the better part. So let's say and we kind of made this transition by talking about manufacturer equivalent part, but let's talk about BOMs other than e-BOMs. So this is a huge benefit in my mind of some PLM systems today is that an M-BOM can be tracked independently from an e-BOM. So you can have a whole set of records that represents your M-BOM. And why is that important? I've seen so many organizations have arguments about how to structure their bill of material. And it's because different groups in the organization at different times in the product's life cycle need to look at the product differently, right? I mean, I don't put it together in manufacturing the same way that I designed it or thought about it when I designed it. And so that's the capability here, right? Is the ability to have an independent bill of material structure, but yet relate it back to all this other information that I already have. I built up all this information when I was designing it, or even like that manufacturer equivalent part, right? Or that approved supplier list, knowing, well, here's who I can buy it from. You need to leverage that when you build your M-BOM to decide, at this plant, I'm going to make it out of these components from that local supplier. But at that plant, I'm going to make it from these other components from this other supplier that has been approved by engineering. So a lot of these things sort of fit together, right, functionally. But that M-BOM, which is its own unique structure, leveraging some of the other information, maybe the other components, the e-BOM components, or maybe having manufacturing components that connect back. So different systems do it different ways. But having M-BOMs, that's another important functionality. It leads right to some others. So I'm going to have some tack a few on here.
Okay.
How about an S-BOM or an R-BOM or a keep going.
Yeah, you're gonna have to explain those acronyms there.
Right.
M-BOM I got, E-BOM I got, S-BOM?
But S-BOM? Yeah, R-BOM? All right. So a service bill of material or a repair bill of material. Now, some people will say an S-BOM is a sales BOM, and that's another thing. But at this point, I'm sort of saying whatever. Other BOMs. You might need to manage X BOMs, right? Any kind of BOM that you might need that's a different view of your product that you need to relate back to the other information that you have. But yet, this BOM is going to have its own maybe behavior, functionality, ownership, security, those kinds of things. So that's an important functionality. It's maybe not just E-BOM and M-BOM, but X-BOM, to your point. That's a great way of thinking of it. But there's one, I'm going to throw one in, I don't like lumping it with X-BOM.
It's special.
It's special. It is special. So many things we talk about are special. And that's unit BOM, right? So X-BOM can mean everything but you. What do I mean by unit BOM? I'm talking about serialized bills of material that really it's as built is what I mean. So you've got all these other BOMs that represent the theoretical, the virtual instance, so to speak, right? The ideal of your product.
The digital.
Well, when we get to unit BOM, now we're talking about the physical one that got made. And I'm going to, throw in another buzzword here, right? We said earlier that like links inside of these systems help us do a digital thread. Unit BOMs or as-built BOMs help us get to digital twins, right? Where we can represent the unique physical instance of the product that we're making. So I could get deep here, I'll stop. But that's another capability in product structure management is managing unit bombs. You have to think about, serialization and lot numbers and all those kinds of things. So
something that's going to become more and more critical with additive.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Something people are going to be looking for in their PLMs.
Right.
And I'll throw one more in here before we wrap up this product structure management. It's a little bit weird, and we kind of touched on it with materials compliance when I said there's some math you might need to do. This is a capability that sometimes it's a generic capability a PLM system puts in place. Sometimes it's very specific, and that's roll-ups. Being able to do roll-ups of different kinds of metadata or resources or different ways of calculating. So it's not always a roll-up, but let me give you an example of what I mean. Cost. All right, I've got a bill of material. I want to do a costed bill of material because that's part of my design process. Hey, I can't go to market until this thing costs less than X. Okay, well, before I get too deep into design, maybe I just want to throw the couple of components on a bill of material and have the system add them all up and tell me, right now, you're at $68.93. Okay, I got to keep it under $70, so I've got $1.07 left to go before I'm at my mark. Or weight, or you name it, right? So that's where materials compliance was kind of a version of this. But I'll say that roll up, the ability to calculate around your product structures, is another functionality that some systems have and others don't.
I could see where that would be something that could be handled in a different application as long as it was integrated with your PLM system, because of how specific that functionality is.
Exactly, right. And that comes back to what I hope we're getting across as we talk through all these things is we're talking about PLM system, not a particular tool necessarily, but maybe it's a collection of tools that you put together to get you what you need. And maybe, as we talk about components of a PLM system, we're really talking about capabilities, right? All the capabilities in a PLM system that you might have to weave together yourself in a specific architecture for you. But what you said is exactly right. There are a lot of specialized tools for that last one.
Well, and I think that's probably more pertinent for this particular episode than the previous one or even the next one, because these are the, last time we were talking about the most common areas within the first 5 components. These are the less common or the more extended. So these are the areas that may or may not be in your PLM system. Maybe they sit outside, but you integrate with your PLM system ideally,
right?
Or your PLM tool of choice.
Yeah. But to your word choice there, right? Maybe they're part of your PLM system, and your PLM system is made up of a PLM system you buy from a vendor plus some add-on tools and integrated capabilities and all, but your system is bigger than just the one you buy from whoever,
right.
Your favorite vendor.
All right. So if I recall correctly, then the last piece, the last common area was collaboration.
I think that's right. So out of our kind of top 5 big buckets, collaboration was the last one. And we mentioned file viewing, I think, is the one that we said that's commonly, you see that a lot in PLMs. But okay, other than file viewing, what is there? Well, I think there's a logical add-on to file viewing that not everybody does, but everybody's gonna be like, oh yeah, well, I think of that as part of file viewing. So maybe you do, maybe you don't. But that's
you're talking about markup.
Markup, yeah. Redline, markup, the ability to do, comments or information inside or on top of maybe the viewing that you're doing. So you're not actually changing the underlying data, but as part of your collaboration in this PLM system, you're able to communicate on top of the data set. Right. And that may look different for different formats of data. So, and then probably even a couple other things you could throw in on top of this, which is maybe measurement. So like in mechanical file viewers, you want to be able to like section something or touch 2 faces and say, how far apart is that? The kinds of things that are inching into what the native tool might do, like a CAD tool will of course let you do that. But you want to give that capability to anybody in the PLM system. So like purchasing can say, all right, this thing is 12 inches long. It needs to go in a box this big, that kind of stuff.
Sure. You want to give them the
redline, advanced tools. Yeah.
Give them the ability to interrogate the data a little bit deeper. You're not changing anything. You're not editing, but you are, if you can't find the information that you want just in the view, you can interrogate the data a little bit deeper. That makes sense.
Exactly.
So aside from interrogating, then, or seeking more information, you had touched on the ability to communicate more information. So when you measure something, you're like, and you want to communicate to somebody, hey, this is too far apart, or this tolerance is too great, or something along those lines. I know a lot of systems do add the ability to comment and do that in different ways. You can save it on the file, the view of the file itself. Sometimes there is, you mentioned earlier in the conversation today, email integration. I know there's a Skype or Slack type capability in some PLM systems as well, as far as communications.
Exactly. And that's what makes this one a little fuzzy. To your point, you might communicate with people through markups or red lines in the tool, or through some comments you send under process management. So there are a lot of ways that maybe your PLM is going to let you communicate. But let's kind of try and define an area here that is, discussion, maybe a little more social, right? And it doesn't have to be related to a specific process or a markup on a particular file, but this broader category of commenting, of discussion, of real-time chat, that kind of thing. So I don't even want to try and nail it down too much, but there's an area here that some PLM systems are building out. And it can be a little awkward because some PLM systems are trying to bake it into their platform and say it's a platform collaboration thing. Others are trying to integrate what somebody else does. Like, I could just integrate with Teams or with Slack or with something like that, Zoom chat. So this is one of those where I think things are evolving, things are developing. But there are also some pieces that have been around for a while. Maybe don't go as far as like Teams and real-time chat, but what about just discussion threads, right? So there are a number of tools that you can go in and have a discussion on a specific record. Hey, let's talk about this part. We're seeing some issues in production. We thought about improving it in this way, but if we use that material, that's going to be tough and that's going to cause these problems. And you get experts from different areas commenting and doing the things they might do in a meeting, but doing it virtually in the system. So it's a collaboration function that I think some systems are offering in different ways. And I can't nail it down well, but it's important to mention that it's something for you to think about when you're thinking about your system, whether it has it, whether you want it, whether you need it, and what vendors might offer to you or what you might integrate.
Yeah, I think one of the real values of that is, like you said, it's information that you might share in a meeting or might go through in a meeting. But if you're capturing it in a digital way, you can refer back to it. Why did we make that decision? Oh, right. We went through all of these different possibilities, and here's why we ended up with this one. And that can really save a lot of time and be very invaluable.
Yep, I agree. Pivoting for a second, though, let me touch on another one in the collaboration bucket. If you're not maybe talking internally or just that kind of strong collaboration internally, but you need to work with people who are outside of your organization, here's another collaboration piece that I think is very important. And I'll call it selective publishing. It's a little weird to call it that because of how I see this implemented, but I'll describe to you generically what I see is people will carve out an area of their PLM system that they'll let other people into, right? They'll let suppliers into, they'll let customers into, they'll let partners into. And it's secured, right? Because you don't want them seeing all your data, or you can't let them see all your data, or you can't let them talk to each other, right? That the partners can't talk to each other, or they can't talk to the customers, or whatever it might be. So you kind of keep them cordoned off. They're in a little safe zone. But then you selectively publish your PLM data to them in that safe area, that portal, right? So some people will call this a supplier portal or a vendor portal or something like that. So the beauty of it is most of the time these PLM systems, they're not copying any data. They're not duplicating anything because you want to keep that PLM system as your single source of truth. You don't want to get confused about, well, they're working on this copy, but I've got that copy. So you don't want to do any of that. So publish maybe is in air quotes. They're sharing something, opening up the PLM in a way that lets these other people collaborate with you on that thing. Maybe using all the functionality and other tools that are in your system, like the chat we mentioned earlier, the red line, or the viewing, or all those kinds of things, voting on a process, et cetera. But it's very specific. And I think this is a really neat area of collaboration. Not every system does it. Sometimes people, they go write customizations to make it happen, but it's an important one to note.
Right. And I imagine it's how you collaborate is going to be defined as much by your own organization and preferences as by the tool the PLM tool or system that you choose.
Absolutely. A lot of times that's one of the reasons maybe you're picking a system or a tool to add on to your system to support your culture, right? How do you work internally? How does your business work? What about your market? For example, this is the kind of thing that's really critical in automotive because so many supply chains with different suppliers have to work together and share data. You almost got to have this.
Yeah, you wouldn't get anywhere without it. All right, so it's funny when we started the discussions about these podcasts, we're like, I don't know if we're going to break it into 3. Like, are they going to all be short? Turns out, actually, none of them are going to be short.
Well, today was cleanup, right? We're just cleaning up a few things in those main categories.
Yeah,
hold on.
This was definitely going to be a short one. Anyway, just keeping an eye on our time. I know that we're about there or a little bit over. And again, we've gone through a lot. Some of these, the first time we covered the most common aspects of the first 5 categories. These are the lesser common or extended areas. And we still have more to go, right?
That's right. We've got like 6 categories left to cover in the next episode, I think.
So it's just never-ending fun with PLM components here. So
Indeed. So I guess to sum up what I think we talked about today,
yes.
To your point, those top 5, we talked about platforms and the extra things that you can do in platform capabilities. We talked about file management.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about process management. We talked about product structure management. There was quite a few there, right? Beyond just an E-bomb. And then we talked about collaboration, I think was the last one we touched on. So I think we've kind of rounded those out. And I'm looking forward to digging into these other fringier ones.
All right. So to set the stage then, we've covered all of those things. Thanks for the quick summary. Next up, we've got project management, systems engineering or product architecture. We've got variant management or product line engineering, compliance, process planning, and maybe a quick touch into ALM as well.
Yeah. Back to the software topic. Yeah.
All right. So that's what you have to look forward to next time. In the interim, if you have any comments or questions, please reach out. Be part of this conversation. That's what we're looking for. Jonathan, thank you very much for taking us through all of that.
Absolutely.
And, looking forward to next time. And until
Me too,
then,
as you could tell, I love this stuff.
And until next time, everyone, stay sharp.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Stay Sharp with Razorleaf. We appreciate you. If you have any questions for our podcast team or have an idea for a new topic for our team to cover this year, please send an email to podcast@razorleaf.com. We would love to hear from you. Also, leave a comment on our post and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, stay sharp.